In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the interface within inside of Maya. And you can see that it's a program that when you first load it up, it feels a little bit daunting. This can be a little bit intimidating, but I want to show you a few things that are going to make you feel a little bit more at ease using the program. Okay, you can see up here in the top right, we've got some different things where we've got different jobs that you might want to do, right? So we've got Maya Classic, Standard, Expert, Sculpting. So these are different kind of jobs that you might want to do. And depending on which interface you put on here, it's going to change kind of the layout a little bit and things like that. So you can see if I put this on animation, it's going to kind of set everything up for somebody that is going to be typically doing more animation. I'm just going to put this on the Maya Classic, and you can see it's got everything here, the time slider that you would use for animation. It's got just basically everything that you would need. Okay, so that's one thing to kind of consider. The next thing to consider is that if you look here in the top left, we have this breakdown here that says modeling, rigging, animation, VFX, rendering, and then also customize. So these are also going to change the different menus that are up within here depending on the job that you want to do. So if you're going to do rigging, you can put on rigging. If you're going to do some animation work, you'd want it on animation. I'm going to leave it on modeling because that's primarily what we're going to focus on for this first thing for the interface. But you can see again that changing this right here is going to change what you see up here in the interface. Okay, so don't think that you need to know every part of Maya's interface for each one of these jobs. What I would say is that somebody can take a lifetime kind of specializing in each one of these different areas. So if you want to be an amazing animator, it might take you a lifetime to be able to do that, amazing modeler. So don't feel like you need to know where every single thing in this interface is. I've been using Maya since the very first inception of Maya, and so it's been years and years that I've been using this program. So I'm pretty familiar with it and I'm pretty comfortable with it. But again, I know that you loading this up for the first time, you're probably looking at this and it's probably looking like the cockpit of some kind of crazy airplane or something like that, right? So we'll get through that. Just take the fear and kind of leave that alone, right? Okay, so we've got this, we've got modeling, we're going to be inside of here, and you can see within the top, we've obviously got this menu set in each one of these. If you kind of drag down, you can see there's different things within each one of the menus, different tools, things like that, right? Something that you might want to note about the interface is that if you go to this little square here, that's the option box. So if you click on that, you can see that you're going to get a box that's going to pop up, and it's going to give you a bunch of different options that you can use. And if you use things over and over, something like that, say we change this setting, you can go to edit and you can save settings, and then next time you use this option box or the options, those settings are going to save with that. Okay, so this is the menu, and then what we've gotten through here, we've got a bunch of different kind of icons. If you take a look and you kind of hover over this, this is really nice where you're going to get these pop-ups. You're going to get, you can see in that pop-up, the top right-hand corner of the pop-up, we've got things that are going to tell you what the hotkeys are. So as you use these programs, that would be another suggestion that I might have for you, is try to learn the hotkeys. Try to do the best that you can for learning these hotkeys because it's really going to speed up your workflow. Okay, so then also on this interface, if you see that we've got these little bars and they've got a little kind of triangle, you can collapse these and you can open these. I like to have everything open. I like to just look at everything, but if it's becoming a little bit too confusing for you, you can always kind of close these things off, right? So this is maybe a limiter on what you might be selecting. So we've got all objects, we've got animation polygons, things like that. Then we also have here these different selection modes. So if we hover over the top of this, you can select by hierarchy, you can select by object types, and you can also select by component types. So let's just take a look and think about what an object type is. So let's say we have a sphere, right? You're going to select the object of that actual sphere, or this camera is an object, right? The component mode is the parts, the small parts that kind of make up that object. So if you have the sphere, if you know anything about geometry, you know that there's faces, there's vertices, there's edges, And those are the pieces of geometry that actually make up that sphere. So if we click on this, you can see that we've got a bunch of different options here for this. If we click through here, you can tell it to have all the components on, so you can select everything. You can tell all components off. So if you want to limit, this is basically a masking for selection type, right? You can also right click on here, and you can see under each one of these there's an option for you to be able to turn on and select and say whether or not you're going to be selecting these things or they're not. The next thing that we can look at is this different way to kind of snap to things. And while I hover my cursor over these, I want to also call out, if you take a look right down here in this area, that you can see that there's tooltips. And so also, you know, I showed you that if you could hover your cursor over certain things, it's going to show you maybe the tooltips and give you shortcuts and things like that. But we also have verbiage that's down in the bottom left-hand corner that might tell you something about these things as well. So we've got something like snap to grid, we can snap to curves, we can snap to points, this is snap to projected center, snap to view planes, and then this is making something live. So that's kind of interesting, where you can take an object, you can make it live, and it becomes almost like a sticky surface where anything that you make new will actually stick to that surface. So that's actually pretty cool. Then next we've got symmetry in through here. So you can do symmetry by an object and where the object sits. So if the object is sitting over here, it looks at the center of that object, and it looks for these symmetry on the left or right or top down of that object and where it sits. So that's a type of symmetry. You can do world, and if you do world, you can see that here within the grid we've got the world origin. So we've got down here the X, Y, and Z, and you can see how that correlates to the grid, right? So anytime you want to take something and you want to move it along X, you're going to go in this direction. We've got Z, which is going to go back and forth and through space, and then we've got Y, which is going to move up and down and through here. Okay, so if we keep hovering over here, we've got also inputs to the selected object. We've got this here. Let's see if we hover our cursor over to that. This is construction history, turning history, on and off. And then these icons start to deal with if you're going to be doing some rendering, doing some things like that. Then if we come over within through here, if let's see, go right here, we can click on this and say we've got these different modes where we can do selections by name. That's probably what I use the most. You can rename things. We've got relative transforms or absolute transforms. It's probably not the right time to really talk about transforms, but that's where these like I said, I like to use this for selecting things by the name. So if you have a lot of things in your scene and you know the name and it's hard to find, you can actually type that in there and it'll actually select it. So then moving on through here, we've got some other parts to this where I believe this is sign in for like your actual account that you have within Autodesk. Moving on from there, we've got some little icons where this is going to change this area quite a bit. So this is called the modeling toolkit. So if you're doing some modeling, you can actually take things and go into this area, and it's going to have a lot of different tools for you to use for whenever you're doing some modeling. We've got also the character setup where you can do like rigging and things like that, and it kind of helps you through that. I'm going to click this here. You might see things kind of show up a little bit different than maybe what you see. Like probably the first time that you have this on here, I'm just wondering if this is going to be like this. We can do some docking of the interface. So if I click on this to turn on, we've got tool settings, but then this is the attribute editor. I don't like to actually have these things docked in here. So like what I like to do is just grab these tabs, click and drag it out, and you can see that this will open all by itself now. So I know the hotkey for the attribute editors. If you hit Control A, it brings that up. It should be under Windows, and then if we go to General Editors, you got the attribute editor. That's if you select an object, something like this camera. You can see here's all the different options for this thing, right? So again, there's a lot of information in here for different objects, things like that. But that's where you're going to get to that part there, and that's going to let you kind of pull that off for the interface. Okay. Then we've also got tool settings, and then depending on the tool that you're using, there's going to be settings per tool, right? You can see as I drag this thing around, you see these blue bars. This is going to let you kind of snap parts to the interface. Now, you may like that, you may not. It's pretty easy to kind of drag most of this stuff off. So when you get used to Maya's interface, you're going to be able to customize this quite a bit. So let's go ahead and close that down. And if we go to the last thing you can see here, this is the channel box. And there's quite a bit of information in here. So we've got just a perspective camera selected. And within the channel box, it's going to tell you, we can see the position of this thing, and we can see that it's right in here. It's actually hidden. I'm going to hit Shift H to actually show the camera. Well, actually, maybe I'll show this camera here, and we need to make sure that we got that turned on. So what I think, let me select this and just tap F, and you can see now I can actually put it on the move tool, and I can see the selection of this camera, where it actually sits in the world. So it's pretty high up in the air. But selecting this camera, we've got translation. So again, remember we've got X, we've got the Z dimension, and we've got Y. And so you can see the numerical values of these things, and you can actually just type things in if you want. And I'm going to put this at 1,000 and put that right there, just like that. And you can see that there's values for translation, there's values for rotation, scale, and also the visibility of that. But then we also have a lot more options that are down here that give you kind of a deeper dive into some of the options for this. I showed you the attribute editor. I'm going to hit Control A to bring that up. And you can see that a lot of the values and things that are being displayed over here in the channel box actually exist within here for the attribute editor for whatever that object is, okay? So that's different ways that you can kind of get to the information for that particular thing that you're using. Okay, let's move down here a little bit. And then this is called the Maya shelf. And then within here, Maya, when you first load it up, it's going to have a bunch of different default kind of options for you. So we've got curves and surfaces. If you're doing poly modeling, you can click on these. And these are more of a graphical icon representation of the different tools that actually sit within here, right? So we've got these different primitives, right? And you could also go create polygon primitives and go to sphere. Like I said, this is just a graphical representation of some of the tools that sit in this different area. So that's kind of the cool thing about Maya, is it gives you a lot of possibilities. It gives you a lot of options for how you might want to use the program. So continuing on, we've got different things for sculpting, rigging, animation. So these are going to be default within here. I'm probably going to keep this on poly modeling just because I'm going to probably be looking at Maya from more of a modeling standpoint. Okay, moving on down through here. Here's our picker. This is just a selection tool, so if you don't want to get anything in the way, you can see I've got this manipulator on. If I don't want to see that, I can put the picker on, and I can just click anywhere. I'm going to deselect, and if I want to select that camera within here, then I'll just go ahead and select that right here for top, and select that. Now the reason is not actually selecting this, I was telling you about this object mode versus component mode. So I'm going to put it on object mode. And then now I can select that as the camera, because this is an object. The camera is an object, and it doesn't have the components that you're going to be able to select for that. And that's what I was talking about, this masking. So because I have that masked and I have it on components, I can't select any objects. If I want to select objects, then I have to move that over, and then I can select at that point. So this is a selection lasso tool. So just like you could click on this and select, or we could click and drag, and that would select. If you've got the selection lasso tool, we can click and drag around here, and that's going to give us a selection. Moving on down through here, we've got this, which is paint selection tools. So that gives you an actual brush that you could use, and if you've got a bunch of different types that you want to keep selecting in a brush format, you can select it that way. This is the move tool. So if we put this on here, I'm going to put this on object mode and put it on the move tool, we can actually manipulate the object that way. With the move tool, we've got rotation, and we can use these to rotate, and we also have scale. Now within each one of these, if you double click on it, it's going to open up the tool settings, which we kind of looked at. That was over and through here. So there's different ways to kind of get to that as well. So you can see within scaling, it's going to have a lot of different options for how you're going to use this tool. And you can change the functionality of that by changing these options within here. Okay, this is the outliner, and again, you can click and you can drag and you can kind of pull that out if you wanted to. You could have it docked into the interface right in through here like this. The outliner, I really like having this open quite a bit. It's going to show you all the different things that you have inside of Maya in the scene. So this is just a default scene. There's nothing really kind of crazy going on. I'm just going to hit Control H to hide that camera. And then I'm going to go zoom in and kind of get closer to the grid within here, like this. Okay, and sometimes it's a little bit easier to kind of select something and kind of like, I'm having trouble kind of like zooming in on here. So I'm just going to make a object. I'm just going to make a sphere real quick, select it and tap F just so I can kind of zoom in on there. So this will be a little bit easier to kind of have some stuff to kind of work with and kind of take a look at and show off. Okay, so that's the outliner. It's got all the different things that exist within through here. And then we have the viewport. And so within the viewport, we've got this menu set, and you can see that there's view, shading, lighting, show, the different components. So say I didn't want to see anything that's polygons, I can turn that off. So this limits what's actually seen in there, and that can come in quite handy. The renderer, now in Maya 2018, the default is just Viewport 2.0, so there's not really too much that you need to worry about there. You can go to the option box for this, and you can see once you start getting into understanding maybe the rendering of the viewport a little bit more, those are the different options that you have for that within there. And then we also have panels where you can create new, like say we're in this perspective camera and we want to make a new one. We just come through here and say perspective new. And we've got these different orthographic cameras. Orthographic cameras are going to be cameras that have no depth perception on them. They're kind of flattened out. And so like right now we're within this perspective camera and it has perspective that you can see on the grid. Now if we go through here and we say panels and then we go orthographic and I put a front view, you can see now we're looking through that camera that is the front view that's over here. I'm going to put that back on perspective. The other thing to know about this viewport is that if we tap the space bar, you can go back and forth between these modes where we've got a quad kind of layout for our cameras, and you can see that this is a top view, a front view, a side view, and then we've got this perspective view. Now if you hover your cursor over any one of these windows and you just tap the space bar, you can go in. If you tap the space bar, it goes back out. So you can easily kind of go through these different modes and kind of look at the object in different ways. Okay, so again, there's different icons within here for camera controls. There's things for the grid to turn the grid on and off. If you hover your cursor over each one of these, it's going to tell you what that it is. You're going to also be able to see down here in the tooltips. That's going to give you some more information about that. And then we've got things like we can see in Wireframe, this is shaded. This is going to be using the default material. This is going to be wireframe on shaded, so you can see things. If you have a texture, you can turn textures on. There's no textures on this right now. If you want to turn on lighting, you can turn on lighting. The reason it's turning black is because we don't have any lights in the scene currently, so it's just going to render the object black. But if you have lights that you made within the scene, then you'd be able to see lighting. This is shadows. If you were able to turn on real-time shadows, you could turn that on. We've also got screen space ambient occlusion, which gives nice darkening kind of effects between different objects depending on the space between them. We've got motion blur, and I really like this one where you can see kind of like right now these lines are kind of anti-alias, not so well, so it kind of looks jaggedy. If you turn this on, this will turn on anti-aliasing and it'll give you a better quality for what you're looking at for the wireframes. Now one thing I will show you is going into renderer, go to Viewport 2.0, go to the option box for this. If you want to turn on anti-aliasing and turn that up a little bit more, you can maybe turn on smooth wireframe, and then you can turn on the sample count. Obviously the higher the count, it's going to be a little bit more expensive, but the quality might look a little bit better, right? And so you can put it on that the highest quality level there for that. And then moving along through here, we've got things like depth of field that you're going to be able to see isolate select. So if we have, let's say if I duplicate this sphere, I'll just move it over. I've got two spheres. What if I only want to see just one of these spheres and work on it at just one at a time like that? So I can click this isolate select and it's just going to show me temporarily just that one item. I can click back out of there and then we're out of that tool as well. We also have X-ray mode where you can kind of see through the objects. We've got X-ray component, X-ray joints. And then this has to do with exposure and gamma within what you see here in the viewport. Probably don't want to do too much of messing around with that. As we move down, then the next thing that we can take a look at is the Maya time slider. So this is, if you're going to be using animation, you're going to be able to scrub through this. If I was able to take this and just, I can select this here, hold down shift, select this, and I'll just right click and say key selected. I can move this to, let's say, a time slider of 30. I can put this on the move tool that we've got right here. I'm going to push this up just a little bit, and then I'm going to set another keyframe, and then you can see that we can use the time slider and slide through this, and we can actually see animation. So this is the slider. This gives you the amount of frames that you're going to be working with. You can see that we've got 120 frames that we're kind of working with right now. We can also do a little bit more, talking about like how many frames per second we might want to do. 24 frames per second is for film. For games or things like that, you might want to put this on 30 frames a second, so that kind of changes the layout for that. And then we've got something very standard for how we play, stop, fast forward, kind of rewind. We've also got some different looping options for how we take a look at the animation. And then we've got some auto key, and then also animation preferences. So if we go to that, we can go load up the preferences. And Maya's got a lot of different options for preferences. That would probably be a much bigger, deeper dive to kind of talk about, but at least you can know that you can kind of get there through this. And you can see for the animation part, here's all the options for the time slider that are within through here. Moving down through here, you can actually type in mel commands. So that's Maya's scripting language that they have. You can also use Python commands that are within there. Now, if you want to get to the script editor, you can see this little button through here, and you click that, and you can see that we've got these different ways to kind of interact with things. We can erase the top part. We could erase the bottom part. We've got these different tabs for if you want to use mel, or like I was saying, for Python within there. And if you go to command, if you say, let's say new tab, it'll ask you, do you want to make something that's mel, or do you want to make something that's Python? So let's make a new mel tab, and you can have a bunch of different tabs within here. You can click this plus. So again, there's different ways within Maya to kind of get to these different options that you see here. So I think that will be enough for kind of taking a look at just the overall interface. I know it's a lot to kind of take in, but if you just kind of go through this and kind of know where things sit, again, depending on the job that you're going to be doing, you're going to want your interface kind of set up in that specific way to kind of work with those tools and things like that. So if you're working on a particular job, you're going to limit yourself down a little bit more within the interface. It's going to make it a little bit easier to use, but you'll be able to work through this.